Sovereignty means self-governance. I always tell my nurses, in a very biblical sense, the 11th commandment is know thyself, which means the thing that we learn in nursing school is know yourself before you know anyone else, or check yourself before you wreck yourself. What that means is knowing your scope of practice, knowing who you are and what you're good at is the beautiful part of you, and the way that you show up within the dynamic that you're in, whether that be a med-surg nurse, whether that be a mental health technician, whether that be an ER tech. The things that you're good at is the reason that you're there. Like I said, when you look at that organization chart and you see that blank question mark of that something is missing, right? And when you fill that role, you're fulfilling a role. The things, the experiences, the knowledge, the skills that you show up with is what you do with the person that you are. It's not who you are. It's the things that you do with the person that you are.
Welcome back to Beyond the Bedside, where we explore the stories, leadership, and real-world challenges shaping the future of healthcare. Today's conversation is one that so many in our industry will connect with on a deeply personal level. I'm joined by Amanda Fernandez, a registered nurse and healthcare leader who is passionate about mental health and the healthcare workforce. Amanda brings a powerful perspective shaped not only by her clinical experience, but by her own journey navigating burnout, leadership, and being diagnosed with ADHD as a young nurse and single parent. In this episode, we're diving into the realities of provider burnout, the cultural shift happening across healthcare today, and what it truly means to lead in the middle of a mental health crisis, both for the patients and for the professionals delivering care. Amanda also shares her personal story, offering insight, resources, and hope for others navigating similar challenges. Amanda, welcome to the show. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. It's great to have you today.
Thank you.
So let's start. You and I have talked a little bit about, mental health, of the healthcare workforce before. In the industry, burnout, of course, is a big topic. Everyone's talking about it. What are the earliest signs you think nurses and providers tend to overlook when it comes to burnout?
Really good question. So I think some of the earlier signs of burnout are usually normalized or something that may be kind of glanced over, overthought, overlooked within ourselves and as healthcare leaders and professionals. Some things like irritability, emotional numbness, dread before shifts, right? That like overwhelming sense of, oh no, I'm not excited for this, right? I don't want to. I think it's a huge thing. I think that's something that's very normalized and that we don't really think about it, but that internal dread right before starting the thing that you're one, not only getting paid for, but two, you went to school and got a license for, right? That you wanted to do. More aggressive signs could look like detachment from patients, and that really can lead to, bigger problems, not only down the line, but in your day-to-day patient care. When you're detached, you can't look for signs and symptoms that you're objectively thinking about, that we're taught to think, because we're not looking for them, that our perception has been kind of distillated from that. And people just think, I'm tired, but it's usually the beginning of that burnout symptom.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's something that I think a lot of people would just kind of ignore, as a symptom. From your experience, when does, stress, right? I mean, some of this is just the stress of what we do or our roles. But, from your experience, when does stress cross that line into something more serious?
Yeah, it can get pretty aggressive pretty quickly. I think, especially with those normal 12 by 3 days, that kind of compounds it and exponentiates it when it stops resolving with those rests. A lot of people, especially, with ADHD, it's all or nothing, right? And us as nurses and healthcare professionals really tend to dive into that category and find ourselves kind of overlapping within that. And when a day off doesn't feel like it resets you, regenerates you enough to fill your cup, right? To be able to go back and have that set of standard that you feel confident and competent giving care.
Mm-hmm.
If you feel chronically overwhelmed, cynical, or emotionally flat, right? That's no longer stress, that's burnout or something deeper.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, I'm curious, when I've worked with people over the years, I think that I've seen quite a few times where people don't necessarily take care of themselves. I mean, I work with a lot of CNOs and CEOs of these hospitals to help build their teams, right? And, I'm taking calls at 9, 11 o'clock at night, 1 in the morning sometimes. I was like, do these people ever sleep? But I do worry that people aren't taking care of themselves. So, why do you think healthcare workers are kind of often the last people to seek help for their own mental health?
Really great question. I know I struggle with this personally. I think that they're in nursing, right? We're taught objective and subjective, which means one is a thing, the other one's a feeling. And those two things can really overlap. And I think that there's a dyadic between those two, but there's also, camaraderie between them. And when your job is a passion, right? How can you be objective and subjective about one thing? And when we're so used to taking care of others and we are seen as the helper, and that is our purpose, our sole passion, and our job, right? We are so over-consumed with others and others' thoughts and feelings and problems. And again, looking at it as almost like a hat we take off. How do we have time left for ourselves? And on top of that, especially within, healthcare leadership, that's our job. That's something that we absorb, and we internalize. And I remember at my last position, I had 3 phones. I had a personal phone, and no one should have more than one phone, right?
Seems like a lot.
I had a consulting phone, and then whichever facility, which there was 37 of them that I oversaw, I had their phone. So not only am I confusing which number that I'm giving to people so they can, be calling for separate things, right? I'm a mom. That always takes precedence, right? But there's also multiple people's lives that I'm overseeing, and making sure that other people are taking care of other people's lives. So not only is there again, subjective layer within this or that, what is leading to what, a vital sign that we're looking at, or a test, a lab test, result that we're reading. And how do we define that in a larger scale? To mean something, right? To draw information from. But on top of that, and with that, right? Not but and we're looking at people's lives. If they're calling out, someone's not feeling good, how are you going to take all of those things and not internalize that, right? And with that, where do we draw the line? How are we going to look within ourselves and say, I'm feeling burnt out, when we're so busy taking care of other things and other people? It goes back, it goes to the back of the shelf, or the back burner, because that's just what we're used to, and we're so inundated doing it. That's what we're taught to do.
Yeah.
And then we do that. So I think that might be a small sliver of part of the bigger structure.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about the how, right? I mean, the how do we do that? So, what are some practical or realistic tools that providers could use, not just outside of work, but during a shift? Do you have some tips there?
Yeah, so I think something that's really important is micro resets. So that looks very functional. The application of which, right, it's always easier said than done. So micro resets are literally 30 to 60 seconds, deep breathing, stepping outside, cold water on your wrists when you're washing your hands, right? First, normal washing your hands with hot water, our 2-minute in depth, right? Making sure that we're taking care of those CLABSI, keeping things clean. But then finishing it up with cold water. Another really practical step that I've heard and I really have implemented is literally when you change doorways, when you're going through a passage. So if you're seeing, right, normal on a med surg floor, we have 8 patients per nurse, right? If we are responding to different call lights, one of the things that I really like to tell my clinicians, no matter if it's a nurse, a CNA, a PT, OT, literally clearing what you were working on with one person, putting that mentally in a bag or a box is what I say, and allowing that when you're passing through the door to go to that next patient, you're keeping whatever is with the last patient in their room, right? In a mental image. That way you're not exponentiating or expounding upon one person to another, and then you feel really overwhelmed, right? Could you imagine if we had a dirty sock, right? I always give this thought process, this mental image.
Okay.
When you're doing laundry, I think we've talked about this before, especially it feels like this with ADHD. You have a load of laundry, right? And you forgot your laundry basket, okay? I do this all the time. but you're trying to grab something out of the dryer and you have socks, you have underwear, you have undergarments, you have coats, but it's always the little pieces of clothing that fall to the ground when you're trying to hold it all in your arms, right? That's a nurse's or a healthcare giver's mental load during the day, every day, and within their personal lives, but it really is expounded and multiplicative during work. So if we're carrying a full load of laundry, if you will, mentally in every single patient's room, that's how we feel, and that's the patient care that we're giving. So that micro reset really looks like keeping the dirty laundry in each patient's room, right? And not carrying it through that threshold of like, I'm sorry, I'm still dealing with the other person's underwear, if you will, in a sense. So really like just taking a breath, changing thought processes, leaving things where they're at, because you don't need, unless someone's dying, right?
Mm-hmm.
Getting someone water feels like someone's dying when you're doing a large load of laundry task for, a full bed bath for another patient. It feels like you have to stop what you're doing in the middle of it and go do something else. And just keeping things individualized and really separate is something that I think is really overlooked. And it helps kind of keep a good cadence throughout the day.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you shared that. I could see, I felt like I was there, right? Being overwhelmed with patients and all the things that are on my mind to do, how easy that would be to carry it from one patient to another to another. And as adults, right, we all have things that happen to our day. It's really hard sometimes to not let that carry into our next meeting or next call, like for me, right? And compartmentalizing that. I love your ideas about breathing in particular. I've really gotten into meditation, and taking that moment to reset, that deep breath is wonderful. I'm going to try that hand washing. I could see how that cold water could really shock me out of that. Thank you for sharing some of those tips. I think that'll be helpful for people. Let's talk a little bit about the current state of healthcare culture. A lot of my clients, when they hire us to help them build out their teams, one of their main concerns, of course, is culture. I need culture builders. This is what's this is what's not working so well. But it's more complicated than just, hey, we want to bring people with a certain mindset or philosophy, in my experience. And I'm curious what your thoughts would be in terms of, how staffing shortages specifically impact not just the workload, but patient care and team morale.
So that is a really good question. Staffing shortages not only lead into retention, there is, if you think about it in a subjective structure, right, like an organization chart, there is a question mark where that team member lies. There is something missing. And when you extract that role in an organization, no matter if it's a larger role or a staff role or multiple staff roles, that if you have the same amount of labor, right, that is necessary in an organization for a day-to-day a census, right, or a certain KPI that you're trying to hit, and keyword trying, that is always, without doubt, without reason, going to be offloaded onto other people. And I think that changes culture. I know that changes culture. I've been in that. Whether it be the offloaded role, right, that I'm now absorbing and consuming and having to work extra with, it will always change a culture. Staff shortages is something that is across the board, right? And we always hear there's a shortage of nurses. There's not, right? There's not a shortage, right? You've been in business for 20 years, a very successful, you wouldn't have a business if there weren't jobs available, right? If people aren't searching for something, hungry for something, it's because there's something missing, right? So it grabs the question of why and when and how, and all of those go into the solution of finding someone who's going to not only fit that role, right, but how is that going to change a culture that has already, all of the other staff have felt that implication of the shortage and the offloading? And how are you going to not only change that, come into their reality, especially as a leader who has traveled and who is dealing with shortages?
Mm-hmm.
But you're coming into a complete picture that multiple people have felt that circumscribed to them. And how are you going to change that? What are you going to do differently, right? Instead of rebuilding the wheel is there. To pretend like the wheel isn't there, right? It's just like looking at a problem with our eyes closed. You're looking at the back of your eyelids, right? And that's what a lot of companies do, which I understand, but even if you open your eyes or close them, staff shortage is still there. Is still there, and people are still feeling that, no matter if that role is, now filled or not.
Absolutely. Well, you've, in your role, in your career, you've really had a chance to work with lots of different leaders, right? And so from your perspective, what do you think leaders are missing about the day-to-day reality right now?
I think that if you took that question literally, leaders are missing from the day-to-day. Honest. One of the most career defining moments that I have had and remember and vividly lead with is I remember going to I was in home health, and we had a large mental health and some substance use with the Seminole Indians, actually. And I remember going to go do a supervisory visit on the Native American reservation, and I will never forget, there were two CNAs, and when I walked into the house of the member, obviously we called them, we let them know that we were coming out, and I say tribe member, our patient, we're going out and seeing them. And it's a very respected elder in the community, something that's very important to them, right? It's a very high-ranking member. Go out to them. And these are contracted 1099 employees, because we had agency and registry. They looked at me and they said, "What are you doing here?" And I introduced myself. "Hello, my name's Amanda Fernandez. I'm the Regional Director of Operations of Clinical Services." And when I tell you, I've never seen someone's jaw hit the floor. They asked me again, because I'm thinking, oh, I'm a guest in the house. They're gonna be excited to see me, or like, oh, nice to meet you. They said, "What are you doing here?" The second time, and I said, and at first, right, you hear that and you're like, "What do you mean?" Am I in the wrong house,
It
right?
goes to show you they're not used to having that present, right?
They are not. No. And so I will never forget that. And so we had a conversation. She said, "I have worked for this company for 15 years. 15. And I have never met my DON. And I've sure never met her DON."
Huh.
And when
Wow.
I tell you how crazy that was, I was like, so I am in the right house, right? I'm in the right place. I'm in the right time. It just goes to show that people aren't there. And I can't tell you how many times, no matter where I'm at, if I'm in a nursing home, if I'm in a substance abuse mental health as a nurse manager, even earlier in my career, helping people, moving beds, right? I was cleaning blood off of a floor one time because a patient, we live in Florida, got bitten by an iguana. Why they were trying to take an iguana into their residential home at the time, don't know, don't ask. I was mopping up the blood, right? It's just my job, right? It's part of it. And I just the response that you have from people, they genuinely want to learn and do well. And I think that leaders are missing that. Leaders are missing the people within it. And you can learn so much, not only about the structure of your business, because at the end of the day, yes, healthcare is a business. You also can learn about how it operates. And that is where the power is. That's where people forget, especially leaders. That's the most important information. You can have KPIs all over the board, right? If you're not looking at the reality of the situation, you cannot make a decision, a conscious decision, and a solution that's going to work for the reality of the problem. 100 times out of 100 times, you will fail. And that's the most important. And when you have people on your side because you're there and you know, information and knowledge is power, and so is your presence. Your presence is power. And people who are reliable, you can delegate to, that you can trust and believe that they're going to do the right thing behind your back and in your presence. And that changes rooms, that changes systems, that changes reality. And that is the most important thing I think that leaders are missing 100%.
Yeah, I think you hit on some really interesting topics there. Leadership is certainly not a title. I run into that all the time. People get promoted or placed in roles oftentimes because of loyalty, longevity. People like them. But merit-based hiring is really important, and leadership is so much more. It's about showing up, right? How do we show up for our colleagues, for the people we support, for meaning both report to and who report to us in terms of that servant leadership type of mentality? What are we doing on an active day-to-day basis? And that could be several shows of topics just on what is leadership and how does that look like, most certainly. One thing that I think people might be really interested in knowing, and I know I am, is What responsibility do these nursing leaders have when it comes to their staff's mental health?
They don't. And I'm just going to be very blunt. I don't think they, right? We talked prior, our culture, our normative reality is that we're not thinking about it. We're offloading it and we're putting it on the back burner. And I think that we are so inundated in objective information that we fail to see the crumbling of our foundation beneath us. And our foundation as nursing leaders is our staff, is our people. I read this great quote that said, and I apologize because I can't give credit for it where it's due, but someone said it once and I'm going to say it again. You cannot call yourself a good leader if you have not created good leaders. And that's a very paragraph, but quote. So it's not a direct quote, but I think that is so true, right? And the responsibility of someone else is the highest responsibility that you can have. And multiple people upon with great responsibility and leadership comes great power, and with great power comes great leadership. And I think it's a very one in the other thought. It's a very fluid thought.
Mm-hmm.
And we overlook our mental health and we overlook our staff's mental health. And I think that we could do a better job just checking in. I had a thought process of coffee with the VP, or I used to bring donuts, or I had a lot of different ethnicities and cultures of my staff. So once or twice a month, I would do it, usually bi-weekly, I would pick a local food. So Jamaican food, especially here in South Florida, or Haitian food, or Cuban food, or whatever it is, right? Fernandez is my last name. So I was able to sparse really good food and ask, and there was another really good thing to ask one of the staff members, hey, what's your favorite local food? What can I do? Again, with funding and being able to do that. But that was a really good check-in point. How are you doing? What is one thing if I could do right now that I could change for you? How could I help you in this moment? And even those, again, micro pauses, having someone and your leadership be not only just present, but being reliable and wanting to know can change the mental health of your staff and cause a lot less burnout, and be preemptive in that. And you're not reacting, you're being proactive in it. And that, it's a great QAPI. It's a great risk control. I know a lot of risk managers love to hear that, because you're not reacting to a problem, you're actively preventing it.
Yeah, and I kind of think of that from the term of engagement, right? Leaders are engaged with their people. They're doing things with them, not just work, right? If you only hear from me when you're doing something well or not well, and that's okay, but that's not really building a relationship. So it's the little things that people do that really make a big difference in terms of that. And I would agree that there's not a lot of focus on, how are we necessarily, caring for the staff and their mental state? What are we doing? I would also agree with your leadership perspective in that great leaders build other great leaders, right? And it's this idea that a rising tide lifts all boats. And not everyone has that mentality. You still see, even today, it's surprising that you have very punitive leaders in certain roles I run into, egotistical. They're making decisions that are all about their control, their power, not about lifting up their team or empowering them. And some people, I think, feel that, whatever. How does that really hurt us? We're doing XYZ well. But the reality is that it is kind of a roadblock for the organization to move forward in lots of meaningful ways. It also tends to lean to higher turnover, lower engagement scores. That tends to also go to the bedside, right? And then all of a sudden now you have quality issues or just lower patient satisfaction scores. And so these little things can make actually a very global difference when a healthcare and the quality of the care they're providing to patients. As far as the leaders go, of course, I hear from them all the time, right? We place these folks. And so they tell me a lot about when and where they're supported well or they're not being supported. But from your perspective, where do you think healthcare organizations are falling short in supporting their leadership teams?
Really good question. I think that overall, we could do a better job with not only objective information, like I go back to QAPI, right? And those quality reports, quality assurance. We're looking at a subjective thing objectively, right? And how we look that in an organizational perspective and quantify that are our KPIs. And that is how we drive business. That's how we continue to change our model and source really good quality points. I also think that I'm a consultant, right? And one of the things that I'm able to do is go in and look at a problem. Number one, not only identify the problem, source the problem, but be able to create solutions based on where they want to go and that drive that change for them. I think that that is very imperative for healthcare leadership, that really the C-suite and above that, corporate, if you will, could help those smaller mid-level or lower level management leadership staff members. And on top of that, give them resources, tools. There are so many different organizations. I'm part of national leadership organizations. There are professional organizations. There's so many workshops, right, that could help me, that have helped me, and that could help me if I'm a mid-level or even senior level leader within a healthcare system, to be able to exponentiate my leadership growth and impact within an organization. And I think that that's something that could definitely be utilized within a healthcare space.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about things that people can do specifically in a healthcare space. One would be, creating the psychological safety, right, in environments that are high pressure. What are some thoughts or tips that you would give people on how to create that safe environment, despite us all working in these really difficult, pressurized, stressful settings?
Consistency, following through, presence, listening without punishment. I know you had talked about being punitive, right? When you have psychological safety, you have belonging and you have love. And love doesn't look like any definition that we're part of, but in that space, it looks like without punitive, without a repercussion. And when you have a space of trust and belonging, you feel part of the impact. And that internal motivation from the staff member is exponentiated and drives more than any type of punishment. Like being a parent is really where I could relate it close to, right? And, within a mental health space, especially Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we know those things. These are the things that we're taught time and time again. We have a textbook on them, but the real life application of them is where we're falling short. To create that psychological safety, we need to not look right down, but look at and really have a conversation, because when we're listening, we know why, we know what, and we can make solutions based on our real life example of what's going on. To put your bias down. I mean, all of these things we're taught, and it's really just connecting to a human being when someone's talking with us and not at us.
Absolutely. There's an important distinction, at or with, right? And that skills of listening, for sure. So if you could implement, one system-wide change tomorrow, right? You just had that magic wand and you're just going to make it happen. What would that be?
So the system-wide change that I would incorporate would be philosophy into all staff's mentorship. Raison d'etre, and I know I totally butchered that, but basically that is. Thank you. Don't come for me in the comments. That is the thought process, the French thought process of why. And this is the way that I teach. This is the way that I mentor. We talked about that internal motivation, to have an understanding of why, the application of which your perspective changes significantly. You look at things as though you are part of the solution. You have a pull, you have a tangible understanding, something held in your hand that your name is in the bucket when you're moving forward. And when a leader is teaching something, when we are trying to fix something, when we are at a stage of growth, when we're applying something new, understanding why helps us create a change in solidarity. So there's less opposing force against us. And that will change systems. It will change culture. It will change our professional and personal understanding of things and make us more amped to move forward even when we have opposition in something and our bias changes, our perspective on the entire situation changes.
So interesting. Well, thank you for sharing that. I am sure that we'll get lots of good ideas and comments. We'd love, of course, to hear what people think about various tips that they can be doing or have done that have been successful in these areas as well. So please share those in the comments if you're enjoying the conversation. Let's switch gears a little bit with you. I'd love to talk about your personal journey. What challenges does ADHD present in a clinical or leadership role? that other people may not understand?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed with ADHD at 23, and I really think that it changed the language that I understood my brain with and the environments that I found myself in. So I think that it's like finding a definition to something that you knew was there all along, and you could put a face to a name, if you will, right? I think also the way that I show up and the intensity that I show up with, it changes. It's a variable. And I think that my mind prior to it felt like that was an outcast and I was the black sheep of the board meeting. And when I fully stepped into that, I realized how powerful that was and that my brain worked differently in a way that the system needed. And that was a blessing and why the change felt so normal and the ideas flow with that instead of it being opposed, if that makes any sense.
It does. It does. Yeah. And thank you for sharing, such personal information. I really appreciate that. As both a parent and a healthcare leader, how do you manage, structure, focus, and the demands?
I don't. They demand me, right? And I think that that's so true. And I think that, your personal story and understanding that comes with a caveat, right? That you can't demand something. The ever changing thing is me. And I think that the consistency and really the way that I understand it is instead of pretending like something isn't there and working in a world that your brain doesn't exist only hinders your ability to effectively function through it. What that means in a real life sense is everything else will always be. I'm the thing that's going to work with all of those things. So all of those things are the way that they are, and the way that I apply myself as the thing that's fixed or the thing that's not fixed, excuse me. I am not the control. Everything else is the control. All of the demands that I have will be there. They're not going to change. And I change myself, which is the beautiful thing about me and my ADHD, to function in those parts. That's what my brain is very good at, right? So if I have 7 board meetings and I have 3 phones and I have a child who also has severe ADHD that needs me all the time, right? How do I move through that knowing that they're there instead of saying, well, I have to do this or be this? Those things will come for themselves. I just need to show up and do my best, and everything flows from within that. And that has been such a game changer for me. It doesn't feel that way all the time.
Sure.
It's definitely made it a lot more manageable in that capacity. And I'm excited to do those things. It's a beautiful thing to wake up and be like, I get to do this today. Yeah, let's do it.
Absolutely. Well, I just love that come from place, and it really does kind of tie back to leadership anyhow. I mean, it's the leadership of yourself, and I think leadership starts with understanding, right? I mean, when we talk about our teams, it's understanding who they are, what motivates them, what their goals are, where and how they like to be supported, need support. It's so important that we spend that same time with ourselves. How do we operate? What am I good at? Where do I need support or assistance or resources? And one of our daughters is ADHD or ADD. She's not the hyper kind, but and myself, I'm not diagnosed, but I have a lot of tendencies that she has. I think the important piece is just that. Well, how do we be effective, right? With ourselves. How are we showing up for others so we can be effective for them too? So, for other people, listening who would share the same type of challenge or similar ones, what resources or strategies do you think have the biggest impact on your success?
Really good question. So one of the words that came to mind was sovereignty. Sovereignty means self-governance. I always tell my nurses in a very biblical sense, the 11th commandment is know thyself. Which means the thing that we learn in nursing school is know yourself before you know anyone else, or check yourself before you wreck yourself. What that means is knowing your scope of practice, knowing who you are and what you're good at is the beautiful part of you, and the way that you show up within the dynamic that you're in, whether that be a med surg nurse, whether that be a mental health technician, whether that be an ER tech. The things that you're good at is the reason that you're there. Like I said, when you look at that organization chart and you see that blank question mark of that something is missing, right? And when you fill that role, you're fulfilling a role. The things, the experiences, the knowledge, the skills that you show up with is what you do with the person that you are. It's not who you are. It's the things that you do with the person that you are. And that dynamic shape shifts and changes within the bubble of your title, knowing yourself allows you to show up in the fullest parts of you. And I think that that's the most beautiful and special thing that you can do. And when you don't know something, to admit that and ask for help allows you not only to love yourself, but to feel connection with other people, and makes you better and makes other people better. Again, henceforth, making the organization better as a whole. And the more that we do that, the more connected we are as a team and as an organization and as a human race.
Absolutely. So what would you say to other healthcare professionals, who might be struggling silently with ADHD or similar challenges? What kind of words of wisdom would you leave them with today?
I would ask how the song that is playing in their head right now is doing. It's always something up there. Or what great ideas do they have?
Right.
I would, in a serious note, I would tell them to ask questions, to be curious, to not look at it as something that is a struggle, though it feels like that sometimes. It is a superpower, and it's a cape of not invisibility, but of solidarity and again, sovereigns. And just to ask questions and to look deeper into things, because our brain naturally does that for a reason, and that's our superpower.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that idea of leaning into your superpowers there. Well, Amanda, this has been an incredibly honest and important conversation. I think what stands out in my mind most is that really the reminder that behind every healthcare role is a human being, and that taking care of the workforce is really just as critical as taking care of the patients. Seems kind of obvious, but I think it's important to recognize that. I think it's also recognizing early signs of burnout, to understanding the realities of today's healthcare environment, to your openness and sharing your journey with ADHD. I mean, there's so much here that is going to resonate with our listeners. So, thank you for your transparency, your leadership, and the work you're doing to support both patients and the providers. And to everyone listening, if this episode resonated with you, we encourage you to share it with a colleague or someone in your network. If you found this interesting, please like, and we would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. These are conversations that are important. And until next time, thank you for joining us on Beyond the Bedside.
Thank you.